with you. This is the big story, not only in the city, but in the province right now. It's one of the bigger political stories in the country. And it dropped yesterday. Auditor General's investigation into Ontario's decision to open protected Greenbelt lands. It's been talked about for a while. Open it up for housing development. The Auditor General found the process did favor developers with ties to the Housing Minister's Chief of Staff and failed to consider environmental, agricultural, and financial risks and impacts. Basically, there was no process. The Attorney General also found the selection of lands removed from the Greenbelt was, quote, biased, seriously flawed, and was dismissive of effective land use planning, end of statement from the Auditor General. The decision was also not necessary, according to the Auditor General, to meet the province's housing target of 1.5 million homes. She made 15 recommendations in this. The Ford government said, you know what, yeah, no problem. We're going to accept 14 of those. The one they're not going to accept is to actually open up the lands to other developers. That plan is a bridge too far, apparently, for the Ford government. Again, Minister Steve Clark, Minister of Housing in this province, will talk to Tammie, scheduled to talk to Tammie at the bottom of the hour. There's a lot of lanes to this highway, Tam. Where do you want to take it?
Oh, I think that we can start off with the fact that this is something that's not being reconsidered. I think a lot of people will have questions about that, considering that the AG has come out and said that this process is flawed, and that the Premier and the Housing Minister did, when they responded to it very shortly after the report was released, said, you know what, mistakes were made. It was admitted, and they had said that they are committed to making changes to ensure that a process like this is followed in a different path next time. But this time, we're still going ahead with it. And so that's one of the major questions that I'll be posing to the Housing Minister. How can you go ahead with something that you yourself have already admitted was flawed, especially when it is such a controversial move, something that people were upset about from the get, and something that goes against some of the promises that the Ford government had made when they were initially elected, saying that they were going to protect the Greenbelt.
Devo?
You guys know this stuff way more than I do. So I'm kind of outsider looking in and asking questions. So I know in Hamilton, you know, a place where I went to school, Mayor Horvath there is, we don't need this. We don't need the housing. This housing situation there isn't as dire as other parts. We have other land we can use. So we don't want that there, right? And you're also going on indigenous land as well. But then I'm looking and reading about the people who can make money off of this and billions of dollars by these certain small groups. And you're saying, yeah, we did that, but we're not going to change it. Am I getting that part right?
That's exactly
so,
right.
But if we do it again, maybe we'll look at the process different. So hold up. You're saying, without saying, like, tell me something was corrupt without telling me it was corrupt. Is that fair to say?
Basically, what was said numerous times at that press conference yesterday by the minister and the premier is like, we completely agree with all of these recommendations. We need tighter restrictions to protect the province from us. But the one we're not going to do is put the bid back up and have other developers come in and try and take a piece of that land too.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it was.
Okay.
That's exactly how it was. Look, Justin Trudeau, in and around this area, I think it was Hamilton, not that long ago said the housing issue is not up to the federal government, which I still think is one of those baffling quotes in Canadian politics in the last 10 years. So when the Premier yesterday is screaming at the top of his lungs, you know, metaphorically, that we have a housing crisis, yes. And right now the federal government's not doing anything about it. I agree with the analogy that we got a fire and we got to run in with hoses and try and help our housing situation.
Agreed.
But when you're offered more than 2 hoses, do you deny the hoses? Do you say we don't need the other hoses? Because that's 2 developers that got minimum $8 billion deals. And I think it's fair to say this Premier has lied on numerous occasions on this topic. In the lead up to one of the elections, I'm not touching the Greenbelt. Boom. Touched the Greenbelt in a serious way. When this deal happened and it was pushed through Queen's Park late last year, he said, no, there's nothing wrong with this. This is on the up and up. Lie. That wasn't true. And he stood there with his minister yesterday and tried, with a straight face, told the media these are not friends of his when they're at numerous events of the Premier's over the last several years. Third lie. I also don't like the dog whistling around immigration in this province about the housing issue. I heard immigration brought up yesterday in that press conference maybe 15 times as a way to soften this blow. I didn't appreciate that. I didn't appreciate that at all. And the one question I would listen, Tammie, you're going to talk to Minister Clark here in a second. I'd love this question asked because you have really good questions. Does he and the Premier of this province honestly believe that we believe they didn't know what their chief of staff was doing? Do they honestly think I am that stupid? Do they honestly think we're all that stupid? The talking points, and if you ask him that, it's going to be, we accept the findings of the Auditor General and blah, blah, blah. I watch the same press conference everyone else watched. Does he think we're that stupid that he didn't know as Minister of Housing and the Premier of the province didn't know an $8 billion land deal was cut even before it was announced? I just would love to know that. So, other than that, I thought it was a fine press conference.
Yeah, it was,
Honestly,
it was a great
I thought
hour.
it was fine.
It was a great hour.
I thought it was fine. Tammie is scheduled to speak to the minister coming up after the break. We're hoping that happens. Also coming up at 7:40, Kisa has a well-crafted selection of cocktails on their menu, and Jean-Paul, who has been eating on the regular for this show, will again sacrifice for the greater good. Coming up. You're watching BT.